Hi, I'm Nyesha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good morning, this is Jonathan Small, host and producer of All About You. This program is broadcast every week from AccessTV.org studios in downtown Hartford. This program, All About You, is designed to give a guest to give their life story. And this morning I have a returning guest who was on my program last year. It's kind of rare that I actually bring a returning guest on, but I feel this is a very important guest to have on this morning, and we're going to discuss some real important issues. My guest this morning is a Republican candidate that's running for governor here in the state of Connecticut, businessman Tom Foley. Good morning, Tom. How you doing?
Morning, John. Good to be here.
Okay. Now, you was on my program last year, so I'm not going to too much get into your biographical nature as I would usually do on this particular show. But kind of what have you been up to since the last time you were on my program last year?
Well, I think I talked last time about having formed the Connecticut Policy Institute. I'm very interested in policy and it's focused on economic and educational policy in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. They're in their third year. They're headquartered in New Haven. They put out some excellent work, which both this governor and the legislature are paying a lot of attention to, and in many cases it's helping them with policy. Mm-hmm. But I've also jumped into the race for governor, so I'm hoping to be governor, and when I am governor, some of this policy work that we've been doing we'll be implementing in Connecticut.
Well, first of all, why have you decided to run again for the second time for governor here in the state of Connecticut?
Well, you know, I came very close last time. It was 6,400 votes. Mm-hmm. I think that this governor has not done a good job for the state. He put in a very large tax increase, which has hurt the economy. It's hurt working families. It's cost us jobs. Mm-hmm. I think the state is very business unfriendly, and so that also is driving taxpayers and jobs out of the state. And I don't think he's done enough to solve the problems of our cities. So when I'm governor, I want to focus on the issues in our cities: crime, housing, schools, and poverty. Mm-hmm.
Now, how many cities are you actually talking about when you say you have a plan?
Well, the ones that seem to have the most challenges are here in Hartford, mm-hmm. Bridgeport, and New Haven.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know, but the FBI just listed those three cities as three of the top 6 cities with the worst crime rates of cities under 200,000 population. So Connecticut is half of the top 6, and it's only 1% of the population in the United States. That's simply inexcusable, and mm-hmm. we need to do more than we're doing to, it's one issue we're talking about, but mm-hmm. to reduce crime in our cities.
Would these be the only main cities that you would be trying to target?
Well, I think the policies I'm talking about can be used in all of the cities in Connecticut, but mm-hmm. the ones who have the biggest challenges, I think, are Bridgeport, New Haven, and Hartford. Mm-hmm.
Now, the opponents might say you lost 4 years ago mainly through Bridgeport, New Haven, Waterbury, and Hartford. So they would say Tom Foley has politics in mind, that he wants to win these cities, and that's the reason why he's deciding to do something for the cities. How would you combat that?
Yeah, that's actually not why I'm doing it. I'm a problem solver, right? As you mentioned, I come out of the business world, and I've mm-hmm. been a business leader for over 30 years. And in businesses, when you're leading a large organization, you're setting goals, you're solving problems, you're bringing people together to fulfill a mission and head in a direction. And so I look for challenges. I look for problems. If you're running a company and you're a good leader, you tend to look for where are the problems, and you're going to solve the problems. Connecticut's biggest problems right now are in its cities. Connecticut's future is only as good as the future of its cities. Mm-hmm. And I believe that Bridgeport, New Haven, and Hartford are the ones that present the biggest challenges. I actually don't think that if I campaign on the issues in the cities, mm-hmm. we're going to win a whole lot more votes in the cities. So it's not really strategic to win more votes. It's to talk about issues that I think matter to everyone in Connecticut. Even if you don't live in one of those cities, I think we all feel like we're part of a large community, and we want to take care of, solve the problems for the people who, in some cases, in our cities, have the biggest challenges in front of them of anyone in the state.
But obviously, Tom, you lost in 2010 by, I believe, 6,000 to 6,500 votes, and Bridgeport was a very important city that had contributed into you losing. Do you feel, obviously, running a campaign, you have to have a better strategy than you did when you ran in 2010? Is this the kind of strategy that you feel you have to be able to become elected?
I don't think we had when you say strategy, if you mean the issues we were emphasizing and everything, I don't think that's what cost us the election last time. We had a very damaging primary on the Republican side. And so I emerged from that primary almost 19 points behind now Governor Malloy, then candidate Malloy. And so I had to crawl my way back from a very damaging primary, and I think that's more than whatever the issues might have been in the cities. The cities typically turn out in large majorities for Democrats, and that's probably going to happen again.
Now, what separates you from the other Republican candidates that gives the state residents here the belief that you would be a better Republican candidate to become governor?
Again, my business background, I think I can bring a lot more to the leadership role, which is what the governor is. The governor is the chief executive of the state. I have experience doing that, and again, solving problems, of which we have many. The others are more, they're insiders. They were former legislators. Mark Boughton is in the race, is currently the mayor of Danbury. So these are career politicians. They have a slightly different angle on things. I don't think they have the problem-solving, decision-making experience, and they're not outsiders. I think what people want this time around is for an outsider to come in, somebody with a different perspective, a new vision of where the state ought to be going, a new approach to solving problems, and cleaning up the mess, frankly, at the Capitol. We have a lot of stuff going on at the Capitol that I certainly don't approve of. I assume ordinary citizens don't approve of. It's politicians with their hand in the cookie jar, conflicts of interest, insider deals. I think ordinary citizens in Connecticut are simply sick and tired of it. I want to go to the Capitol and represent them. I'm going to come into town I'll be the new sheriff in town. I'll clean up this mess.
Now, do you think your image presents a positive image for a person that's going to run our state if he becomes elected a governor?
Well, I certainly hope so. I've been traveling around the state for the better part of 6 months. People are very upset with what's going on. I think people feel they've lost something. They're acting like somebody who's been hurt or harmed, because I think a lot of people feel that Connecticut's prospects now, after 3 years of Governor Malloy, are not as good as they were before he was elected, and I think they at least partly blame him for that, and I think he has not maybe exhibited the type of leadership and positive vision for the state that people want and need, and I believe I can do that. And I have positions on issues that I think are going to make sense to people. This governor put the largest tax increase on working families in Connecticut's history. It's an average of about $700 per taxpayer in Connecticut. That's a lot of money. And now he's just offered people $55 back. I call this the Malloy three-card Monte. Here's the deal. You give me $700 for every year for the rest of your life, and I'm going to give you back $55 once. I just think that people understand that tax increase put a big burden on working families, has slowed down the economy, has cost people jobs, and in a lot of respects it accounts for why Connecticut isn't doing as well as most states nationally, and certainly our regional neighbors. So that's one thing we can change. I think this governor's record, when people look at it, all the job losses, some 30,000 Connecticut citizens residents have lost their jobs under this governor. It's simply not a very pretty picture.
Would you give him any credit for the leadership under serious issues that has taken place, like the Sandy Hook incident and the very devastating incident that has taken place?
Well, everybody, when a tragedy like that happens, or Hurricane Sandy, looks to their leader to provide leadership and comfort, and to take care of the people who've been harmed, and he did a good job of that, and he actually polls quite well on that. People approve of the leadership he showed at those times. But on the issues that matter most to families and voters, he doesn't poll very well, and he's down in the 30s and low to mid 30s on things like jobs in the economy, the budget, taxes, and so on and so forth. So I think when people go to vote, those are the things they're going to be thinking about.
Okay. Now, Tom, from what I understand, you don't really have any political background. You have never served any political elected official office on position. Do you think that could be a liability that other candidates can say we have been involved in politics? We've ran certain policies. I mean, would that be an issue that you think people might look at you differently?
Well, first of all, I have served in government twice. I served in Iraq in 2003 and 2004. And then I served in the State Department for 2.5 years as the U.S. ambassador in Ireland.
Okay.
So I do have government experience. I know how government works, and it's very different from the business world. But so I know what government does well, but I also know what government doesn't do well.
Okay.
And there's some things that this government and our national government are trying to do that governments actually don't do very well, like picking winners and paying corporate welfare and so forth. People who have my type of background realize that these are the things that are going to fail, and it's a waste of taxpayer money. So I think that's an asset. I don't think most voters think that being a career politician is necessarily something that's attractive to them. We have a history in this country of having citizen legislators and citizen leadership. And our political system is designed to encourage people to come in to politics and leadership later in their lives after they've had experience that ordinary citizens have, for example. And so I think that's a very good tradition. In a parliamentary process, you have to work your way up through a party over a period of 20 or 30 years before you can even run for office. So I think it's a better system. I think people want people to come in from the private sector who have other types of experience, particularly for a role, a CEO type of role like governor. So no, I think my background's an asset and something that voters will see as a plus, not a negative.
Now, in 2010, you spent, I believe, $12 million of your own money. Is that the correct amount? Or
is that what it was?
10 or 12 million. I mean, it was something in that area.
It was a lot.
Okay, but that was your own personal money that you spent when you ran in 2010.
Yes, because we have a very, I would say, not very well designed campaign finance system, so that it's very hard for somebody like me who was not a career politician, was not building up name ID and a network over a series of elections to lower offices. And the restrictions on fundraising are such that for a governor's race today, if you went through the traditional system, I raised $3.5 million. Now, that's the most that was ever raised in a governor's race by a non-incumbent. But there's no way you could win with that amount of money, particularly now with the public financing, which gave Governor Malloy $7.5 million or $8.5 million. So I'm a pretty good fundraiser. I actually do have a lot of experience raising money for other candidates, and so I'm pretty good at it. And I could only raise $3.5 million, and yet Governor Malloy had $8.5 million of taxpayer money to run his campaign. So they put so many restrictions on people being able to raise money, and they've done this purposely. So you either have to take the public financing, or you have to use your own resources if you have them. That's not quite fair because not everybody obviously has $10 or $11 million to spend on a race. So it sort of skews it toward people who can afford it, and it really shouldn't be that way. So I think the traditional system should have been opened up more so that people could raise more money, but they haven't done that. So this time I'm going to qualify for the public financing, and I may take the public financing, but I also may not.
So right now you're kind of keeping your options open, whether you're going to spend the same amount of money you spent or take the public finance.
Because last time the legislature came in and changed the rules after the primary, so when they knew I wasn't taking the public financing and they knew that Governor Malloy was, and they gave him an extra $3 million. So that made a difference in the race. Without that, he would have lost.
Okay. Have you decided which lieutenant governor that's going to be your running mate?
I haven't, but we have some interesting people who are running. Penny Bakayaki is running. Mark Boughton, who's running for governor, has asked Heather Summers, who's the former mayor of Groton, to run with him. They've paired up as a ticket. David Walker has announced that he's running for lieutenant governor. So there's some very good candidates on the Republican side running. It would be, I believe it would be way too early to team up with one of those candidates. I probably will endorse one of those candidates at some point, but not for some time.
But it's really important that you do eventually decide to choose a running mate for your campaign.
Again, the campaign finance laws are a little messed up, but they're not as messed up as the system we have now for the parties selecting nominees, because we have a non-binding convention in May, which is the way that nominees used to be selected, but now that's just the endorsement of the party, and then you have to go to a primary. So what could happen, it used to be that you team up as a ticket, and then at the convention they would pick a ticket, and that became the governor and lieutenant governor ticket, and they'd run together. They changed the laws, I don't know, 20 or 30 years ago, and now there's a primary, and both the governor and the lieutenant governor separately have to run in primaries. So you might pick a lieutenant governor you want to run with in the fall, but that lieutenant governor may not win the primary, so you may end up, and this is exactly what happened in 2010. If you recall, Mike Fedeli, who was running against me in a primary, picked Mark Boughton.
Well, excuse me, Tom. We have finished the first part of this segment. Let's bring that back up when we come back.
Good.
We're going to take a quick break here. This is Jonathan Small hosting All of About You. I have this morning as my special guest Republican candidate Tom Foley, that's running for governor, and we will be right back. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about.
Hi, I'm
your
Paul
business
Willis,
and
host of the Grassroots
Business.
Business Journal
Okay.
on accesstv.org.
LLC is a
We have a segment called Pitch Your Business, where small business owners have the opportunity to give a 3-minute elevator pitch about their business. If you are a small business owner, need to get the word out about what you offer, then you need to put a face with your business. On the Grassroots Business Journal segment, Pitch Your Business. You can contact me, Paul Willis, at 914-222-3771 or email me at paulw.sales@accesstv.org. Get World Wide Web business exposure. Be seen on the social media links like Facebook or Twitter. So pitch your business, the place for small business marketing needs.
Good morning again. This is Jonathan Small, host of All About You. I have this morning as my special guest Republican candidate for governor and businessman Tom Foley. Tom, when we left off, you was kind of explaining the differences between, I guess, having a running mate in the process of a lieutenant governor and the
Right.
tickets.
So now the way the system works is there's a separate primary for both. So you could pair up as a ticket at the convention, and then, as happened in 2010, Mike Fedeli picked Mark Boughton. Mike Fedeli lost to me in the primary on the governor's line, and then in the lieutenant governor's line, I actually hadn't picked somebody to run with, but Mark Boughton won. So I ended up running with somebody else's pick for lieutenant governor. That could happen again. So the system's a little different now from what it used to be, and so it makes it a little dicey to pick somebody, because if you pick them and they don't end up getting elected, then it looks like you don't have support, or you pick the wrong person or something. So anyway, it's a little complicated.
Okay. Well, Tom, how would you identify your policies? Are you a liberal, a moderate, or conservative?
Well, I'm a problem solver, so I listen, this state needs to be headed in a different direction. We have such incredible assets in this state, not only our people, but institutions like our educational system, our natural assets, and our position where we are in the U.S. between Boston and New York. It's should be an economic and powerful economic engineer, and we have a very rich history of being a strong business state. And so I want to get a hold of those assets and get them working for us again. And under this governor, they simply aren't. And I think people feel that the future of the state has been squandered to a certain extent under this governor's policy. So I'm going to take us in a different direction. I'm going to fix these problems. And for me, it comes down to solving the fiscal issues. We simply have to stop the growth in spending. So I would hold spending flat. Once we've done that, I would drop the state sales tax 0.5%. Sales tax is the most regressive tax we have in the state. It hits working families the hardest, and it's the biggest brake on the economy because it reduces household income and therefore what people can spend. So I would cut the sales tax by 0.5%. I would eliminate all taxes and fees that cost more to collect than they generate in revenue, of which the Yankee Institute estimates are more than 100 in Connecticut, if you can believe it. And then I would work with the legislature on real tax reform. Then which would stop driving families and driving jobs out of the state. So with that, I think we can get our economic direction going in a more positive, to a more positive place. Then we need to simply make the state less anti-business. We have so many anti-business policies, and Governor Malloy is stepping on the brake on businesses. It's very annoying to run a business here. It's expensive. The attitude is we don't want you, and we want you to pay the bills, by the way. We can change that around. I'm a business person. All my fellow business people are running large corporations here in Connecticut. I can go to them and say, listen, what do you need to want to stay here in Connecticut? And at the same time, I'll say, and listen, there's some places in Connecticut where we need jobs that we don't have them, such as Hartford, Bridgeport, again, New Haven. And let's get some of our large employers in the state to work with us to put some jobs in our cities, because a lot of the jobs that are the new jobs being created in the state are out in suburban areas, and they're not in the inner cities. And that's where the highest unemployment rates are, particularly among young minority males. And we simply can't have a future for the state if there isn't a promising future for everyone. Then I'm a good government guy. I really think that there are a lot of shenanigans that go on at the Capitol. Insiders, special interests, gaming the system. You see Governor Malloy taking contributions from state contractors. I think that's shameful. It should be illegal. It was illegal, and they changed the law so he could do this. If you're a sitting governor, of course, state contractors, they make their money off of the policy decisions you make and the money you hand out. And so, of course, they're going to support your campaign. But it's corrupt, in my view. Even if it's not legal, it corrupts the process so that the ordinary citizens lose confidence in their leadership and their state government. And they shouldn't have that, particularly at challenging times like we've had now. And finally, my urban policy for fixing the problems in the cities. And I mentioned it a little earlier in the show. But our schools in our inner cities simply are not doing a good enough job with our young people. And if you don't have an education today, a decent education, you really don't have the same opportunity. We talk about opportunity in America and being able to get the first your foot on that first rung in the ladder. And if you don't have a decent education, that opportunity really isn't there. So we can't really talk about equal opportunity and everybody having the same chance if we aren't giving everybody the same education and skills, certainly through K through 12. So education reform where schools need it, and I think our city schools are the ones that have the biggest challenges. Crime, I talked about crime, and I have a lot of ideas about how we can reduce crime in the inner cities. Housing, there simply isn't enough good housing in some of our cities. I understand there are only 1,500 rental units in Hartford. Now, if you don't have enough housing for people to live decently in the city center, it tends to kind of collapse. People are just there during the day, they have jobs, and then they go home, and there's nobody to spend money at restaurants and bars and have kind of a city life. So we simply have to do more with housing. Some of the housing stock in these three cities has deteriorated. Some of it's abandoned, for example. We need to figure out ways to fix up the housing stock. And jobs, and I talked a little bit about how we can maybe bring jobs back to the city centers.
Well, let me ask you 3 questions about the urban centers and the urban cities in our state. First of all, what type of jobs would you try to target to bring into these cities? What would you address towards the reentry system problem of the ex-felons having a very difficult time making the transition? And pretty much what type of education and training attainment programs would you kind of advocate after K through 12?
Excellent question, because they sort of work on themselves. You don't want to bring in jobs that the workforce in the city can't fulfill successfully.
Okay.
So you need to bring in jobs that the people who are there with the skills they have a decent chance of getting those jobs and succeeding in fulfilling those jobs. Otherwise, you just have people commuting in from other places to fill the jobs. So that's number one.
Okay.
But number two is you start working with employers and you say, who would you like to employ here? What people with what kind of skills? And they tell you, and then you work with the workforce to build those skills. So you can do that through vocational training. You can do it through other workforce training programs that the government hosts on its own. A lot of different ways. You can send people off to school no matter where it is, but to make sure that you're building the skills in the workforce so that people can grow in the complexity and the value added of their jobs, and that way their incomes and their skills grow, so they become more and more valuable to employers all the time. So it's but you have to start with jobs that people can fulfill with the skills they have currently.
Okay. Now, recently in Connecticut, I don't know if you caught the news over the past couple days, but there's been a tremendous heroin problem that's increasing in our state. There's been some heroin overdoses in the Metro Hartford area, but pretty much throughout the entire state. Would the drug policy be something that you would definitely have to try to look at as revamping, or how would you go about looking at our drug policies here in the state?
Listen, you see drug use in communities where there's not very much opportunity and where people don't have a lot of hope. So I believe that with my urban agenda, my urban policy agenda, if you bring jobs, you improve the availability of quality housing, you provide the opportunity for people to get a good education, and you reduce crime, the drug problem will go away. Now, maybe not go away entirely, but it'll be reduced very significantly on its own, because drugs are a result of a lack of opportunity, jobs and other opportunity, and not a cause so much of it. So I think if you fix these other things, that problem will be reduced.
Well, you wouldn't look at Colorado, what they have done with legalizing marijuana, as something that you would look into doing here in this state?
Well, I know that policymakers in the state are considering it. There are arguments on both sides. Some people think that marijuana is an entree drug to more serious drugs like heroin, as you mentioned, and others don't think it is. I don't really know the answer, but I think that that's an important decision, and there should be some serious research. Thank God in this country we have 50 states, so we have an opportunity to have incubator experiences. So we have states out in the Northwest, and we have Colorado who've legalized marijuana. Let's see what happens there and how that works, and then based on that, I think we can make a decision on what we should do in Connecticut.
So you at least be open-minded towards any suggestions on some of the policies?
Of course.
Okay.
I'm a problem solver.
Problem solver.
If it's going to solve a problem and not create a bigger problem, of course.
Well, we definitely agree it's a major problem in our society,
Absolutely.
and Connecticut is no different than any other particular state.
Well, you're talking about heroin.
Well, I'm really talking about all types of drugs. I mean,
Sure.
it's not, heroin is on the rise right now, but we have a tremendous drug problem when you look
Yep.
at a lot of different drugs. That is abuse, do crime, do gun violence. So it's a major complex problem all across the board. And I think we have to look at doing something differently to I guess you say you're a problem solver. This is a major problem. This is a problem that needs to be solved. And I think the urban centers in particularly are very devastated by drug violence,
Absolutely.
open-air drug dealing. So I think that would have to be part of a plan or an agenda towards solving some of your urban centers throughout our state.
Absolutely, but I think the real way to solve the drug problem is to give people a good education and make sure they can get a job so they can support a family and support themselves in a decent way. And I think people who have that opportunity, they realize that drug use puts it all in jeopardy. So people who have that kind of opportunity don't want to risk it, so they don't get involved in drug abuse. But if you don't have any opportunity, you don't have a job, drugs may seem like an option with no cost associated with it. So we simply have to create the opportunity, both educationally and with jobs, and I think that'll reduce the amount of drug use. And in the meantime, I think some of the things that Police Chief Esselman, for example, is doing down in New Haven and other efforts to reduce crime can be applied to the problem and help reduce drug use.
And you'll be open-minded and willing to work with the Democratic mayors in these urban centers? You think you have the type of working relationship that could be effective?
Well, that's part of what I talk about in my business experience. If you're leading large corporations, you are bringing people together to solve problems, and I think I'm very good at that. I don't care whether people are Republican or independent or Democrats. If you're in a leadership, once you're elected to office, you have a obligation to. First of all, you represent everybody, not just the people who voted for you, or not just a party, and you have a responsibility to meet the challenges of that community. And I would deal just as easily with a Democrat as a Republican. Or if somebody's the mayor of a city, I'm going to sit down with them and say, listen, how can we work together to solve the problems of the city?
Mm-hmm. Well, one city in our state, and it's technically, I think, an urban center, urban city, is Stamford, Connecticut. And that city seems to have a lot of business growth, a lot of prosperity. Ironically, our governor used to be the mayor of Stamford. Sure. Would that be some type of model that you would try to implement through our other cities in our state?
Well, listen, every city is unique, and Stamford is lucky because it's very close to New York City. And so back in the 80s, a lot of companies moved their operations out of New York City, which at the time had much higher taxes, much more onerous regulations and regulatory burdens on employers. So a lot of these, a lot of banks and other companies and financial services moved to Stamford. But Bridgeport's a little too far up the road. It's harder to convince people from New York City to move to Bridgeport. It's a longer commute, and I think a lot of people, the employees of those businesses, want to live close to them, and yet they want to still be close to New York City. So if you're reporting into work in Bridgeport and you have to commute 30 or 40 minutes up the road in order to be close enough to New York City so you can get in and enjoy the city from time to time, it's less appealing. So I think Bridgeport doesn't have that advantage.
Okay.
And Bridgeport and New Haven both are another 40 minutes away from an airport than Stamford.
Mm-hmm.
So to get to an airport where you have a significant options on flights from New Haven, you're talking about an hour and a half drive to get certainly to LaGuardia Airport or Kennedy. So one of the things that this urban policy agenda I'll have proposes is finding a way to get more regular air service into the areas surrounding New Haven and Bridgeport.
Well, Tom, let's continue this conversation.
Okay.
We're going to take another break, and we'll be right back. Again, this is Jonathan Small hosting All About You this morning, and I have this morning as my special guest, Republican candidate Tom Foley. Thank you.
I'm very happy to be here tonight to congratulate and support AccessTV.org. AccessTV.org has reached hundreds and thousands of people. It's done a great job informing the community about important issues in our city, our state, and our nation. I congratulate Stan McCauley and Nyesha for the job they've done. And now with their new format, which will reach many more people and which will be available through many more formats, the future is very bright for AccessTV.org. Congratulations, and may you continue your mission of informing our community. Thank you very much.
Good morning again. This is Jonathan Small, host of All About You. This morning I have as my special guest Republican candidate for governor of Connecticut, Tom Foley. Tom, let me just address one thing. I don't know in 1991 if you were in Connecticut, a former governor, Lowell Weicker, implemented the state income tax. And I've been doing a lot of research, and I've been finding out a lot of businesses actually and a lot of people left Connecticut after that state income tax Were you in favor of that state income tax back then?
No, I was against it. I actually ran some advertisements against it because we down in the southwest corner of the state, basically Fairfield County, a lot of people come there. They move there from New York City to raise their families, and some of them work in New York City. Some people work in other places in Connecticut, like Stamford, where they're financial services, and a lot of them came to Connecticut because of the more favorable tax regime. And now we've taken that away, and that advantage isn't there anymore. And many of those people end up retiring to places other than Connecticut. So when they leave, you have to make sure you have other people coming in behind them, because these are very generous taxpayers, and they help pay all the bills for the state. And now what's happened with this governor's policy is he's accelerated people leaving the state to retire to Florida or just leave because people can't afford it. And people aren't coming to replace them. Young people with their families aren't coming to replace them. So that cycle's been broken a little bit, and I think it's unfortunate. I was not in favor of the income tax for that reason. I foresaw that was what was going to happen. I think the way things have developed now, it would be very impractical to get rid of the income tax for sure.
Okay.
But I think the income tax is higher than it's probably good long-term good for the state. Under Governor Rell, it was down around 4.5%, and then we had a significant enough differential with our neighboring states that people were still coming to Connecticut to raise their families. But I don't think that's happening as much now as it did.
If you was to become governor, would you be in any position to reduce the state income tax if we're not going to be able to?
Well, I talked about first solving our spending problem, which is huge. Under this governor, the annual spending has gone up by over $3 billion, or about 15%. It just keeps going up, even though they mysteriously talk about cuts. Nothing's being cut. And so once we've done that, then I think we can talk about comprehensive tax reform. And in comprehensive tax reform, we would look at all the taxes and say, well, what is the right balance of taxes? The state obviously has to collect revenue. So you can't just eliminate taxes. Obviously, you have to have a source of revenue. But where is the best place to collect that revenue so that you place the least burden on working families, you keep from driving the tax base out of the state and keep from driving jobs out of the state. That would be the objective. And that might include some alteration of the income tax.
Okay. Now, Connecticut does have some very good strengths with the quality of life, our educational system to some areas. You don't think that's enough, though, to really carry our state just with those strengths? You think we have to definitely get some other areas corrected?
Well, if you don't have the right policies and you don't have the right leadership taking you in the right direction, absolutely not. You can have all kinds of, I mean, a ship is a great asset, but if you're driving it up on the rocks, it's not going to be an asset for long. So it's all about leadership and policy, and I simply think this governor's the policy direction and the place he's trying to take the state is not going to be good for the state long term, and so those assets are being wasted. I have a wonderful wife who's an attorney, and I have 2.5-year-old twins. I don't know if you know that, a boy and a girl. Yeah.
Yes.
So if you're a parent, you're sort of thinking about what's the future going to be like for your children, and I want to make sure that Connecticut provides at least as good an opportunity for its children who are the age of my children, as we all had when what was handed to us by our parents. And so we need to be good stewards. We need to take care of these assets. We need to protect that future. And if you don't have that, you don't feel good as a parent, and your children are going to suffer. So these things matter. And we all want, Leslie and I hope our kids decide to live in Connecticut. But if we keep progressing along the path that we are right now, it wouldn't surprise me if they chose to live somewhere else because the opportunity simply isn't here.
Well, how does Connecticut do when it's competing against our border states like Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island? Are we doing favorable with those states?
Terribly. Well, it depends on what you pick, but economically we're doing terribly. New Jersey and New York and Massachusetts are doing better. Their governors are much more popular. They've had much more centrist policies that were like what I'm talking about, problems. Let's fix the problems. Let's forget about partisanship and ideology. Let's fix the problem for ordinary people and working families. So they're doing better. Education, Governor Bill Weld in Massachusetts, I think Connecticut was had the 6th best scores on the NEAP exams for 4th and 8th graders, and Massachusetts was 8th back in the mid-90s. Massachusetts is now number 1 because of real education reform that he implemented, and we've dropped down to 8 or 10. We have the largest achievement gap in the country, which is shameful. That's the gap between our worst performing schools and our best performing schools.
Well, let me address this. When Governor Dan Malloy was running in 2010, and every now and then he will continue to bring it up, that Connecticut over a 20-year period was in tremendous decline. And would you say over the past 4 years, has he made the situation worse, or still okay?
It wasn't in as much decline as it's been in the last 3 years. When I travel around the state, Jonathan, people feel like they've lost something. They feel like something's been taken away from them. And I think what they feel is that they felt a certain way about the state, that Connecticut was a leader in so many ways. It was it had all these assets you're talking about, and it did offer opportunity and a promising and bright future for its citizens. And I think today people just feel that it really isn't still true, and that seems to have accelerated. I don't think before this governor was elected people really felt that way, but now they feel that way, and I think they largely blame him. I think they feel that his tax increase and many of these policies and taking the state in the wrong direction in so many ways has directly resulted in that sense that Connecticut's future has been compromised or squandered.
Now, Connecticut is kind of labeled as a blue state, and it's a heavily Democratic state. Do you think you have the influence to kind of win because you say you're going to obviously address a lot of issues in your urban cities, and honestly, you lost by 6,000 plus votes.
Sure.
Had those votes gone, particularly in Bridgeport, in your favor, you would have become governor. So do you think a lot of the people in these cities have the belief in a conservative Republican?
Well, keep in mind, I won 128 out of 169 towns in Connecticut. So I won a majority of the towns. I just said some of the ones he won were bigger, unfortunately, than some of the ones I won. But it was very close. But I don't. We're a blue state, but 43% of registered voters are registered unaffiliated. So I don't know what color unaffiliated voters are categorized as, but both Democrats and Republicans are in the minority. They're less than half of voters, and they're not the largest bloc. So to get elected in this state, you have to win unaffiliated voters. And I won unaffiliated voters by 19 points. Unfortunately, as a Republican, you have to win them by about 20 points to win in a statewide election. But I talk about a Wisconsin moment, and Wisconsin in 2010 went from having a Democrat governor, Democrat state house, and a Democrat state senate to all Republican. And that could happen in Connecticut. And I think it will, because I think people just realize that even though we've had Republican governors, our legislature, both on the Senate side and on the representative in the House, have been overwhelmingly controlled by Democrats for 2 decades or better. And that's where a lot of the policy and the fiscal control and responsibility comes from. They ultimately are in charge of how much money gets spent and how money gets collected. And those have been Democrats. So I think people are starting to go, wait a second, I'm not sure this is working out so well. And when they do that, they get fed up, like people feel that they're just fed up. It's like, come on, can't somebody fix this? They say, well, let's give the other team a chance, and I hope that's what happens here. And I actually think that New England, which has very few Republicans now representing them in the Senate and House down in Washington, I think people are going, yeah, maybe that's not such a good balance.
Well, Tom, some of the states, at least I know Indiana, this past year has gone from, I guess, a right-to-work state. Is that correct? First of all, Indiana made the switch, or was that another?
Well, it depends. Right to work is a kind of a loose term.
Okay.
But, Wisconsin certainly moved more in that direction. I'm not sure about Indiana.
Okay. Well, first of all, would you be advocating any executive order to look into making Connecticut a right-to-work state?
Very impractical that you would turn Connecticut into
Exactly.
a right-to-work state. But I think public sector unions probably have more influence and control than they should in the political process. So they tend to get people elected who then are beholden to them. And when that happens, they become a special interest. They become an insider. They influence policy. And all of a sudden, the ordinary citizen, like you and me, aren't being represented well. And so I think a governor should make sure that the unions don't have an inappropriate level of influence in state government and policy.
Okay.
And I'm not sure that's what we have today.
Now, going into November, what is your next move that you're going to be planning towards?
Well, right now the process is I have to go around and first of all raise the money to qualify for the public financing. I'm not sure I'm going to take it, but I want to at least qualify for it. So I go around to Republican town committees, and we also have a convention coming up in May, and I want to get the endorsement of the convention, so I have to win a majority of the delegates. So I'm out meeting with delegates. I have 3 or 4 of these every night. It drives my wife nuts because most nights I'm not home having dinner with her and our children. And I'm doing things politically. For example, on Saturday I'm in New Haven with Martin Luther King's niece, who happens to be a Republican.
Okay.
And we're having an event for her in the morning. She's going to be speaking on issues that matter to her, and then there's an event for her in the evening where some awards are being given out for people who've been particularly helpful in their community. So I'm doing a lot of political events like that, trying to expand my support, help people understand what I would do if I were a governor and get the message out.
Now, let's just say, I know every candidate believes that they're going to win, but let's just say worst case scenario, you lose the Republican convention. What would be your next move after that if that was to happen?
Well, I would still go to a primary.
Okay.
And I think I would win a primary even if I weren't the endorsed candidate.
And
if you're the endorsed candidate, it makes it harder for we would hope that the party would at some point gather around and put its support behind a single person and make them the nominee, hopefully before they have to go through a primary, which, like last time, could be a damaging primary, and then your candidate, your nominee, comes out and they have less of a chance of winning.
Now, is there any misconception that I'm hearing these reports all over the country that the Republican Party is in shambles? Is that really a major problem that you think is accurate? I mean, how would you identify those statements about the Republican Party? That it's in chaos. You're not really sticking together. You're not getting behind really important issues. You're not reaching out to the minorities, to the gays. Are these statements that are factual, or is this some?
I don't believe that's true.
Okay.
And if it's true in some parts of the country, it's definitely not true in Connecticut.
Okay.
And so when you're in a presidential cycle and the parties talking, it's a national dialogue. You're hearing Republican views from parts of the country that are not the same as the Republican views of people here in Connecticut.
Okay.
Listen, the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln. It was the Emancipation Proclamation was put in by a Republican president. The women's vote was put in place by a Republican president. Republicans are, I think they're unfairly tattooed, particularly in some parts of the country, of being not inclusive. But in Connecticut, I think they're very inclusive. I'm a very inclusive person. There's nobody that I don't want to be part of my party and supporting me and my campaign and my desire to get the state headed in a positive direction. So I think to certainly apply that to Republicans or Republican candidates in Connecticut won't get much traction with people because they'll hear the dialogue and they'll see that that's simply not the case.
Yeah. Just one last question.
Yeah.
Would you ever decide to change parties, like Laura Weicker did? I mean, or become an independent? Are you dedicated and committed to be a Republican?
Well, I'll tell you, I call myself a Ronald Reagan Republican, and to me that means limited government, the rule of law, individual rights, and respect for the United States Constitution.
Okay.
And I actually think that the Republican Party represents those fundamental principles for me more than the Democratic Party does. So I believe in those principles of the Republican Party, and so it would not make sense for me to abandon the Republican Party. Now, career politicians do that because sometimes if they stick with the party they're with, they might not get elected, and I think that's when you see party switching. That's why. But I think it's important for leaders, particularly a governor, to be committed to certain principles. And you can't just be shifting around with a political wind, whatever it happens to be during the day. And I believe that the challenges that face Connecticut, that the Republican Party actually has the right answers now, solving the fiscal challenges, helping our cities out of their job, crime, housing, and educational hurdles, and improving the quality of government. We simply, I talked about good government. Our government is not very efficient. It wastes a lot of tax dollars. We have a lot of politicians with their hand in the cookie jar. We've got all kinds of, you live here in Hartford, we've got lobbyists, and we've got special interests, traveling around everywhere buying people lunch, hoping that they'll pitch them some business or something like that. It's to me, it really disappoints me. We need to clean that up, and I think a Republican's more likely to do it than a Democrat.
Well, that definitely have to be your last words, Tom. I had enjoyed having you come all the way from Greenwich this morning to be my guest, and I wish you the best of luck in your own campaign run for governor.
My pleasure.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Again, this is Jonathan Small. I hosted All About You this morning. My very special guest was Republican candidate Tom Foley. And this program could be seen on accesstv.org, and there's a lot of other good programs on this network. And as I say every single week, have a very blessed day and keep the faith. Thank you.